David's dynasty was not found in a tomb, a palace, or a royal archive. It was found on a broken enemy stone. The Tel Dan Stele does not prove every Bible story. It does not tell us what David looked like, how large his kingdom was, or whether later legends grew around his name. But it does preserve something that changed the debate, an early outside reference to the house of David. The strange part is who carved it. Not a worshipper of David, not a scribe from Jerusalem. The stone was probably made for an Aramean king, an enemy boasting about victories over Israel and Judah. He meant to celebrate defeat. Instead, thousands of years later, his broken monument became one of the most important artifacts in biblical archaeology. An enemy king tried to erase his rivals from the map. In the process, he accidentally helped preserve their name. The story begins in the north of modern Israel at Tel Dan. In the early 1990s, archaeologists were working through the remains of the ancient city when a fragment of dark basalt appeared in a wall. It was not standing proudly where its maker had placed it. It had been broken. Its pieces had been reused as building material. That detail matters because the monument had already lost its original power. Someone had smashed the enemy boast, then folded the fragments into a later structure. The first fragment was discovered in 1993. 2 more pieces were connected to it the next year. Together, they preserved part of an Aramaic inscription, carved in lines across the stone. The text was damaged, incomplete, and full of missing edges, but enough survived to show what kind of object this had been. It was a victory inscription. A king was bragging. He was saying that his god had helped him defeat rival kings. This was normal ancient propaganda. Kings carved their wins into stone because stone was supposed to outlive witnesses. But this stone did more than record a battle. It opened a window into the age when Israel, Judah, and Aram-Damascus were fighting for survival. The author is not named on the surviving fragment, but many scholars connect the inscription with Hazael, king of Aram-Damascus, one of the most powerful rulers in the region in the 9th century BCE. That world was not a peaceful Bible illustration. It was a hard political landscape of small kingdoms, shifting alliances, tribute, raids, siege warfare, and royal propaganda. Israel was in the north. Judah was in the south. Aram-Damascus was a dangerous rival from the northeast. The inscription boasts of defeating kings connected with Israel and Judah. It is written from the enemy side, which is exactly why it is so valuable. It is not trying to make David's dynasty look important. It is not trying to defend the Hebrew Bible. It is trying to glorify an Aramean victory that gives the artifact its power. When a friendly source praises its own kings, we expect exaggeration. When an enemy source names a rival dynasty, we are seeing what that rival was called by outsiders. The Tel Dan Stele is not a sermon. It is a piece of political memory. And buried inside that memory is the phrase that made the stone famous. The phrase is usually translated as the House of David. In ancient Near Eastern language, a kingdom could be named after a founding ruler or royal line. Assyrian texts called Israel the House of Omri, long after Omri was dead. In the same way, the House of David points to a dynasty, not necessarily to David standing there in the story. That distinction is important. The stone does not say, "I met David." It does not describe David's life. It does not prove the size of his kingdom or the details of every later story about him. The careful claim is narrower and stronger. By the 9th century BCE, an outside enemy inscription appears to know Judah's royal line as the House of David. Before this discovery, some scholars argued that David might have been mostly literary memory, a figure magnified by later writers. Others argued that the biblical tradition preserved a real dynastic founder, even if the later stories were shaped by theology and politics. The Tel Dan Stele did not end every debate. Archaeology almost never does, but it made one extreme position harder to hold. The name David was not just living inside later biblical manuscripts. A related dynastic name had been cut into stone by an enemy in the Iron Age. This is where viral archaeology usually goes wrong. A discovery is real, then the headline makes it do too much work. The Tel Dan Stele does not prove that David killed Goliath. It does not prove that Solomon ruled a golden empire. It does not prove that every battle in Kings happened exactly as written. It does not settle how large early Judah was. It does not turn archaeology into a simple yes or no answer for faith. What it does is more precise. It gives historians an external inscription close to the biblical world that refers to a royal house associated with David. It anchors the name in the political vocabulary of the region. That is why the artifact is stronger when we do not exaggerate it. The drama is already there. A smashed enemy monument, reused in a wall, preserved a phrase that later readers would argue over for decades. The stone is not powerful because it proves everything. It is powerful because it proves less than people want, but more than skeptics expected. One of the most cinematic details is easy to miss. The Stele survived because it failed. Victory monuments were meant to dominate public space. They told defeated people who had power now. They made humiliation permanent. But the Tel Dan Stele was broken apart. Its fragments were built into a wall. That means someone later had the authority or the desire to destroy the monument's message. Maybe the city changed hands. Maybe a later ruler did not want an Aramean boast standing in the city. Maybe the stone was simply useful material after its politics had gone stale. We cannot know every motive, but the result is clear. The monument stopped being a royal announcement and became rubble. That rubble protected it. If the stone had stayed exposed, it might have weathered away. If someone had ground the stone down completely, the phrase would be gone. Instead, broken pieces waited inside a wall until archaeologists found them. History often survives like this. Not as a perfect archive, but as damaged evidence inside later buildings, copied texts, reused stones, and accidental leftovers. The Tel Dan Stele sits inside a larger problem. How do you compare ancient texts with archaeology? The Bible is not one simple book written at one time. It is a library of law, poetry, prophecy, story, royal memory, theology, and national trauma. Archaeology is not a magic machine that prints final answers. It gives fragments, inscriptions, ruins, seals, bones, pottery, burned gates, city walls, and broken monuments. Sometimes those fragments line up with the text. Sometimes they complicate it. Sometimes they are silent. Silence is not always disproof, and contact is not always total confirmation. The hard work is matching the right claim to the right evidence. That is what makes the Tel Dan Stele so useful. The claim is not vague. It is not just atmosphere. It is an inscription in a known regional language from a plausible historical context, naming Israel and a royal house connected with David. For a channel about ancient mysteries, this is the kind of mystery that matters, not a fake secret. A real fragment with real limits. So the final story is not that one broken stone proved the whole Bible. The better story is sharper. A king from Aram-Damascus probably wanted his victory to last forever. He carved his boast into basalt. He named the rivals he had defeated. Among them was a king tied to the house of David. Later, someone smashed the monument. The enemy's message was destroyed, reused, and buried inside the architecture of another age. Then, in the 1990s, the fragments came back into view. Not complete, not simple, but clear enough to change the conversation. That is why the Tel Dan Stele is so dangerous to lazy certainty on both sides. It does not let believers claim too much. It does not let skeptics ignore the name. It forces the argument back onto the stone itself. David's dynasty was found on an enemy stone. And the most important thing about that sentence is not how dramatic it sounds. It is that the stone is real.